The renationalization of the historic Argentine petroleum company YPF last month was met with hysteria and threats from bankrupt Europe. Members of the European Parliament condemned the decision and called it an attack on the exercise of free enterprise. British Foreign Secretary William Hague expressed his deep concerns over Argentina's expanding protectionist agenda. Spain threatened Argentina with retaliations and accused the country of being isolationist. Jaime García Legaz, Spanish Secretary of State for Trade, announced that Argentina's decision on YPF would be challenged at the G20. The G20 is a forum that promotes free trade and market economy, and this decision is a protectionist decision that breaks legal certainty, that breaks the rules of free market, and therefore the very pillars of the G20. It also affected many U.S. companies. Latin American governments are very concerned about this decision and the risk of contagion. Well, of course Argentina is attacking the free market. The free market system is bankrupt. And of course the moves are protectionist. Argentina, among other trans-Pacific nations, is protecting their right to develop. They're protecting against the resource grabs and the economic warfare that had been previously imposed on them and is continuing to drive the entirety of Europe and the international system into the ground. And it's also true that there's a risk of contagion. Courage can be contagious. Following the example of YPF, Bolivian President Evo Morales announced the nationalization on May 1st of the Spanish-owned electricity company TDE. At the May Day ceremony, Morales announced, "In honor of all Bolivian people who have struggled to recuperate our natural resources and basic services, we are nationalizing Transportadora de Electricidad." But contagion is not the biggest concern. Considering the fact that over 90% of the petroleum in the world is controlled by the sovereign nations in which that resource is found, it seems that this rational and not uncommon decision struck a disproportionately large nerve. In an article in the May 2nd edition of the London Guardian, Professor of Imperial History at King's College London, Professor Richard Drayton, suggests a reason. The fury on the pages of the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal is not ultimately about oil or profits, nor even about the bad precedent it might set for future expropriations elsewhere. Rather, it is provoked by Argentina having interrupted a chain of securitization anchored in the real world by its oil at one end, but with investment banks in London and New York, the holders of swap and other derivative liabilities on Repsol and YPF debt, at the other. Despite the hysterical response from those who hold the end of this chain of fictitious debt, the build-up to the G20 has received a different response. The group of 20 finance chiefs refused to put the issue of YPF on the agenda, stating that it is not a forum for bilateral debate. Furthermore, the BRICS nations decided to defend Argentina and drafted a declaration responding to Spain's accusation of isolationism, which will be presented at the upcoming G20 summit this June. On the same day that the European Parliament called upon the EU to put sanctions on Argentina, the BRICS nations invited Argentina to co-sponsor the declaration with them on the issue of employment, economic growth, and international commerce. The declaration refutes the charge that Argentina is becoming isolationist and states that open commerce does not generate economic growth, development, and social inclusion on its own, but that there are other policies that promote investment in human capital and infrastructure. Furthermore, it calls on the international community to respect the policies of developing countries, so that they may achieve their objectives of growth, development, and stability. And finally, the joint declaration makes the point that it is not possible to develop commerce without a stable international financial structure, and therefore calls for effective regulation of the financial system and supervision of the banking system. So you have a situation where the fastest growing economies in the world, Russia, India, China, and Argentina, are being lectured on the issue of economics, or threatened with war, by bankrupt Europe and the bankrupt United States. While Spain faces the worst unemployment disaster in Europe, with 50% youth unemployment, Argentina has turned their economy around to have record levels of employment, including in productive high-skilled jobs. For this reason, according to Spanish consulates in Argentina, some 1,200 Spaniards immigrate and settle in Argentina every month. According to Marta López Tapero, an international mobility expert at ADECO, the typical Spanish immigrant is a man aged 25 to 35, often an engineer, architect, or IT professional. Such a level of immigration of high-tech professionals is not surprising, considering the Argentine government's attitude towards science and technology. At an event of the recently founded Max Planck Institute headquarters for South America, the president of Argentina stated that the development of science and technology is a policy of state, never to be abandoned, but to be deepened in every respect. This event was attended by 2 Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and medicine, as well as 30 officials from Germany's Max Planck Institute, more than had ever left Germany for such an event. President Fernandez discussed the advances that the nation had made in science since 2003, when her husband Nestor Kirchner was elected president, and they began to change the direction of the country as a team. Since 2003, Argentina's investment in education has tripled. While in 2003, 5% of the GDP was going to pay the debt and only 2% towards education, today it is the reverse, and the investment in education is almost 6.5% of the GDP. As a result of Nestor Kirchner's creation of the Ministry of Science and Technology, the budget for science and technology has increased by 937% since 2003. There has been a 66% increase in human resources dedicated to science, and a 67% increase in scientific infrastructure. There has been a 72% increase in scientific researchers. 890 scientists have been repatriated, and that figure is expected to reach 1,000 by the end of the year. And 40% of those repatriated scientists are returning to their home country from the United States, where science is dying under the current political conditions.
La importancia de la ciencia y la tecnología, estas son cifras y ahora vamos a pasar a los conceptos, a la aplicación realmente de todo esto. Hemos logrado, creo yo, romper un prejuicio o un tabú que había en la Argentina respecto de la vinculación de la economía entre lo académico y lo científico. Parecía como que no podíamos articular, en definitiva, no podíamos hacer ciencia aplicada, porque en definitiva, ¿qué otra cosa que ciencia aplicada es precisamente utilizar el conocimiento humano, todo lo que la mente es capaz de descubrir, de encontrar, de articular, para poder aplicarlo a la economía, que no es una ciencia exacta. Para nosotros la economía es una ciencia social, porque es precisamente la ciencia que debe tender a mejorar la calidad de vida de la gente. Por eso la concebimos como una cuestión social y no como una cuestión de números. La ciencia no tiene por qué ser acartonada y aburrida. La ciencia también debe munirse de humor, de sentido común y fundamentalmente de una gran vocación por ayudar al prójimo y una gran vocación de aprender, de ir por lo desconocido. Hoy leí una frase de Einstein, leí en un diario, no sabía, conozco muchas frases de Einstein, a mí hay una que me gusta mucho y que la repito en cada reunión del G20, ya que estamos, les voy a contar lo que Einstein también está presente en el G20. En el último G20 dije que recordábamos a Einstein cuando decía que solamente los locos pueden pretender que aplicando los mismos métodos o mecanismos se puedan obtener diferentes resultados. Esto estaba vinculado un poco con las políticas que se siguen discutiendo todavía en algunos ámbitos del G20 y sobre todo en Europa, donde se pretende seguir aplicando las mismas políticas de ajuste y se quiere llegar a diferentes resultados de lo que han obtenido en todas partes del mundo estas políticas de ajuste, que han sido fracasos y fundamentalmente miseria, no inclusión social. Y cuando hoy leía la frase de Einstein retomando, que decía que si no es una idea absurda, mejor ni dedicarse a estudiarla. Y a mí me encantó porque no la conocía, porque realmente revela el verdadero espíritu de la ciencia. La ciencia tiene por sobre todas las cosas un profundo inconformismo. Por eso se dedica a estudiar, a interpelar, a desafiar a todo lo que está para demostrar que puede ser distinto y que puede haber otra cosa. Yo por lo menos interpreto que la ciencia es eso, un gran desafío a lo que ya está y conocemos. Si no desafiamos a lo que ya está y conocemos, es muy difícil ser científico, es muy difícil hacer ciencia. Y en un país donde solamente nos conocían por las vacas o por los granos, queremos que también nos empiecen a conocer por la ciencia y por la tecnología, porque no estamos dispuestos a ser consumidores de ciencia y tecnología, sino que queremos ser y somos productores de ciencia y tecnología. Que este es el gran desafío que queremos seguir llevando adelante.